is the substrate of a scientific paper actually the right format to release science in?
As time goes on, as we get more access to data and compute, scientists do become more computational by nature, even if they never were before. It's useful to publish papers. It's useful to get this information out there. The problem has always been we only publish certain things. And so we're not getting any information around what's failed or what's been tried.
There's all these places in machine learning, in science, in journalism, where the story and the underlying data that were used to create the story were always had to be bundled. And that created a lot of problems. And the solution is not to get rid of stories. We are now in a place where the underlying data is actually probably just as important as the story. Alice, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So for people who don't know, we've been friends for a long time. You are the founder and CEO of Recollect.ai, which you recently sold to what company bought you?
SmartNews.
SmartNews. I'm excited to have you on here because you're just one of those people in AI that's actually been doing it for a really, really long time. And you've seen many different AI summers and winters.
Yeah.
And I just find you to be incredibly smart and thoughtful and have built a business in the space that you sold. You said it was an acqui-hire. So I just want to kind of get into what happened in the business you learned about running a company in this era of AI and kind of what's on your mind now. And I'll say for people listening, I really liked Recollect as a product, and we have not caught up since the acqui-hire. So we're gonna just do the conversation that we would normally do, just hanging out together. So welcome to the show. Give people a little bit of an introduction to the product and the acquisition process, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to be doing this. We have not got to catch up, so this is good. So yeah, Recollect was, which is interesting to talk about it in the past tense now, but it feels, I don't know, it's bittersweet. I'm proud of what we did and I'm excited about it, but yeah, I don't know, it's hard. Just because I sat with it for so long, which I'll go through sort of the journey of building in this time of AI and how everything feels really, I don't know, time just feels like it's accelerating faster than it would have if I'd built this company at another time, right? If it was a software company 5 years ago with no AI, I feel like it would have been a different experience or a different journey. In any case, so Recollect was really focused on knowledge workers. You got to try out different versions of it over the years. But our main goal was, can we take all the stuff that you're consuming? Could we connect it for you in this really personal way, the way your mind would? And then how do we make use of that for knowledge workers? So we started out with this tool, and we had a few different interfaces over the years we worked on it, but that you could recall what you were thinking if you were doing writing or research. This is sort of pre-ChatGPT times. And then earlier this year, this calendar year, we had shifted into don't tell us what you're thinking about, tell us what you want to accomplish. And then we'll bring all the materials to you. We'll do the synthesis for you as needed, or we'll sort of alter those materials in a way that's useful to you as a knowledge worker. And everything we were doing was really aimed at how do we make all this stuff that we have access to accessible and useful for you, with the goal of enabling human intelligence, really, rather than the machine intelligence piece of it.
Yeah. And I just resonate so much with that mission or that goal. That's one of the things that got me so psyched, because I'm a little bit more of a late comer to AI than you. And so one of the things that got me psyched about it is that I feel like I've been such a nerd for tools for thought or technologies that expand the way we think or the way we see ourselves or the way that we create things and the way we understand ourselves, all that kind of stuff. And it just feels like there's so much there and you were playing in that space. And I'm kind of curious, what did you learn about trying to build a business there that you didn't know before?
Yeah, I think a couple of different things. When I started, I left my full-time gig to work on this in 2019. So things were really different at that point. Like Bert and Elmo, these early models that come out, it's all an opportunity. The ideation phase on like, okay, we have a capability. What do we build with it? What's useful in the world of this capability? Like what's possible now that wasn't? Uh, that was an interesting process. It took, I'd say, a year and change, probably with COVID too, stuck in there and all of the chaos that surrounded that. Um, but the journey on building a business for it, I think, it had these separate phases. One of them was, I would say, like, we have this really nascent technology. Nobody really understands it. I'm trying to explain what's possible to do with it. But the models really weren't quite. This is like GPT-2, maybe. Like they weren't amazing yet. Like I could see potential, but that was hard. I think once the models got a bit better, and especially after like ChatGPT launched, everybody woke up and was like, "Wow, this is really cool." Um, and then we had this middle phase as a company where I still was a bit skeptical about, okay, do we shove this into a product and have it generate things? Do we trust the models to do that in a safe way, in a sane way? And I thought no. Um, and so we had this middle phase of company building where we were launching a consumer product. We wanted it to be something that was useful for people, but also like navigating all of the, I guess, like, oh, we could do that, but is that really in line with what we want to do? Or is that just because like something new came out with the model and we could veer that direction? Um, that was interesting to navigate. I think on the whole, this is now like having gone through the whole cycle. If I had to do it over again or had the opportunity to do it over again, I would have launched the product much earlier. Um, I would have let the messiness be okay with customers and just see what happens with that. Um, I think we did a bit of trying to protect that and say, okay, we want to have this integrity. We want it to be, um, yeah, we want it to feel like a really seamless experience. We don't want them to really feel the weirdness of using these AI tools. And then the third phase was really, uh, as these tools are way more widely adopted, they're in everything. There's this huge explosion in this space. Um, Trying to think about, okay, what is the actual application other than retrieval? Because retrieval was such an easy one. And we were like we were doing a lot of retrieval stuff in the beginning. But then what happens after that? Like once you retrieve a bunch of things, what is useful to do with those things? Yeah. So it was an interesting tripart journey, I'd say.
That's interesting. I definitely, I think that's such a common like thing, and it's so hard. It's like easy to say and hard to like actually internalize. Is just like ship something faster that you're like not as proud of and just see what happens, kind of.
Yeah.
Can be very scary because obviously like you want to make the best product possible, and it's like a weird thing to be like sometimes making the best product possible is is doing the messy thing or whatever. It's just like it's a weird thing to get into your brain. um I think one of the things I'm interested in is when you started, it was like BERT and maybe GPT-2-ish days. Like, what made you be like, okay, this is happening now?
I think I willed it to happen, honestly. Like I even in like going out, we did the typical like VC fundraising process too. And so I really was there was no moment where I was like, okay, yeah, we finally hit it. I was like, no, this is going to happen come hell or high water, even if I have to make this true. Um, so yeah, I feel like it was really convincing other people that like, no, these embeddings I'm talking about are really, really important. Um, yeah, and that was hard.
Okay. And what do you think about like you wrote an article in Every a while ago, and I read it. Oh, I had edited it a really long time ago, so I only have some of it in my brain. But basically, I just feel like you have a really strong and clear thesis for like how humans and AI can work to get together and what that should look like, or could look like, and it's a sort of like cyborg hypothesis. And I wonder if you could like lay that out, because I think a lot of people, it's a big question on people's minds, like where are we going if we're going to use this as tools? Like, how does it work and also keep us being humans and employed? And then I'd love to talk about like how that has shifted for you over the years building this company.
Yeah. And it certainly has shifted, which has been interesting to kind of catch myself in between. You say these statements in the world, and then something changes, and you're like, oh, you have to readdress or reassess the whole situation. Um, so the cyborg piece, I'm still pretty hell bent on. I think this has been my shtick for a long time now, coming from human studies to working with machines. I have this belief that humans are really kind of amazing creatures, and that if we're going to use a technology, it should be to augment them rather than to just build an AGI. Like, the goal for me is not some sort of super intelligence that works without us. It's how do we start to connect this technology to humans, and really finding those touch points. I think knowledge is one of those. So if we think about knowledge work in general, a lot of it is consuming, distilling information, understanding, and then really kind of propagating that information out to other people, other knowledge workers in those systems. Um, and so for me, I think a lot about how can we use AI or machine learning or any of the other technologies to make that process easier for humans so they can do the creative piece. And I think that's where we get to how do we all stay employed. Um, I'm a big proponent of, uh, lowering the bar, raising the ceiling, I guess. So what's possible, we don't even truly understand quite yet. Um, but like, if we can find the touch points where it makes that human work a lot easier. And I don't think we're quite there. I don't think chat is the right interface for this. I don't think the models have the right context for it. Um, I think, and I say this again and again, like, I still think we're going to need some sort of biometric feedback piece in there to really make this work. And in that case, it's about finding where humans are not deficient, but where they kind of struggle from their evolutionary constraints, seeing where the technology can come together. And it's not like creating artificial eyes. That's pretty cool, but that's not exactly my thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was laughing earlier because I feel like we have this like recurring sitcom or soap opera or something that every time New York Tech Week comes around, we're like on a panel together. And like the first year, it was like me and you, and it was like right after ChatGPT launched, and it was like a couple other people, and I won't say who or whatever, but like there was one person on the panel where me and you were just like looking at each other the whole time. And you're like, what does he say?
What is happening here? Yeah.
That was really fun. And then the next year, we were on another panel about AI and creativity or something like that. And we were on different sides of the debate because we were talking about chat interfaces and whether or not chat interfaces are the future of AI interactions. And like you said just now, you think the answer is no. And I was defending chat. And I'm curious, like, how that position has evolved for you and why, if you could refresh my memory, why you think chat is not the right interface.
Yeah. Trying to remember the argument I made on this panel. I probably won't be able to recall it exactly. And I'd also love to hear how your position may have changed over time. But so I think language is a super powerful tool, right? We're using it right now to communicate with each other. We read, like, we consume it in this way. I don't think that it is the most natural way to access things like this. I think we've actually moved farther in this direction probably since that panel too, with all of this agent stuff happening, where we have this kind of thing that does work in the background for us, but it intuits what work to do a little bit more, and it accomplishes that without us saying, like, "Hello, robot, please, blah 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 blah." And I think the only way I've come maybe a little closer to the chat piece is I've used it more. Like, I find myself in new spaces, like where I'm like, okay, I just started a new company. I'm in a new area where I'm thinking through things. It has become a little bit more useful for me to say, like, okay, I'm thinking about this. What are the pros and cons, right? And right now I have colleagues that are in Japan. We're 13 or 14 hours removed. Um, and so it's helpful for me in that sense. It's still not my main interface though. Um, so I think um, I'm doing more coding too. And so I think, like, the main use for me right now is code. And that's sometimes chat.
Uh, Cursor, or like, what are you doing?
So I'm coming back to Cursor. I'd used it really early on. It was really buggy, and I was like, "This is ruining my GitHub. I can't use this. This is terrible." I'm coming back to that. Um, yeah. So I use VS Code. I have Copilot, all the regular things. Mm. I do some chat. I really like the Claude artifacts. That has been a really big game changer for me. Um, and this is where maybe my chat argument does hold up. So it generates these basically like little maps of things, right? Like you can have it do these mermaid diagrams as one of the artifacts. And I think really visually, I draw things out a lot. I'm famous for having this remarkable with me everywhere I go and sharing these. Like I think I put these in one of my articles I published. Like this is how I think. I don't really think in this like chat back and forth situation. So it generating that has been interesting for me too, as a way to collaborate in a non-text way.
That is interesting. Yeah, I guess like, so for me, and when I talk about chat, I would like include like, voice, video, like, and the sort of like back and forth kind of way. But maybe it should be, maybe it's like more properly limited to just text. And I think probably the reason I like chat as an interface is like, I'm just so verbal. Like I just so that it just like makes a lot of sense. But if I try to turn my own personality into like a general truth about like what's good, which I think is typically how things work. If I try to do that consciously, I think the reason that I like chat as an interface is it allows you to push forward along many different dimensions simultaneously. Where a lot of other software interfaces are like, it's either on or off, or it's like, it's on along one axis at a time or something like that, which is quite useful for refining something, sometimes, for refining something, or for processes that you're doing where the dimensions that you're improving along are like really well known and really well understood, and it's sort of repetitive. Um, but then there are a lot of other processes, particularly creative processes, where you're like trying to explore space along a bunch of different dimensions, and you don't really know what the dimensions are beforehand. And I find that to be quite good for that exploration process and for the like refinement process of like, okay, you like produced this thing, like now I want you to like push it in this way or whatever, define what that was before, but now I see it, now I know. So a really good example is we've been incubating products inside of Every, which is really cool. I would love to tell. And one of the products that we incubated is this product called Spiral. It helps to automate a lot of like the repetitive creative tasks that you do if you're running a company or you're a marketer or you're a creator. So an example would be like, for this podcast, I also have to take this podcast and turn it into a tweet to get the episode out. And that's a very repetitive process because I kind of have like a format that I know works. Like I have a good first line, and then I have like a couple of bullet points about like what are the key topics that we discuss that I think are interesting or whatever. And I realized that Claude is like really good at doing this. If it's a few shot prompt and you give it a bunch of examples of like podcast transcripts that turned into tweets, then it can like do that over and over again, and it gets you like 80% of the way there. So we built Spiral, where it's basically like a few shot prompt builder. So you can make a spiral for turning podcast transcripts into tweets, or you can make one for turning blog posts into LinkedIn posts, or turning, whatever, release notes into a product announcement or whatever. I'm giving you this very, very long-winded explanation because one of the things that we found is like in the Spiral interface, when you have a spiral, let's say we take my podcast transcripts to tweet example, you just paste your transcript and you press run, and then it gives you a bunch of example tweets that you can try. And like one of our biggest pieces of feedback of people wanting an improvement is like, I just want to chat so that I can say like, this example was good, do more of that. You didn't really think that would be the case. Like we had ideas for like, maybe we could do sliders, or like maybe we could like really what you should do is go back into the spiral creation flow and like modify the prompt a little bit and like make the prompt a little better. And what we're finding is like the natural thing to do is it's sort of like you run a company. It's sort of like when someone that's reporting to you comes to you and it's like, I did the thing that you asked for, and you're like, okay, this is great, but here's a couple things I need you to do. That's a very natural way to kind of push something in a sort of multidimensional, somewhat unknown space. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. Yeah. And I think that like using AI today is really good for this, right? Like this like first draft, be it, create the tweet for me, write some code for me, write whatever, like any kind of production thing. In that process though, right, I think there's this very interesting teacher-student relationship, which shows up. I think there's some new stuff around this, around training tiny models based on big models, and those are really cool. But I think there are like two interesting pieces there. One is the human in the loop, and this I think we do usually agree on, which is like the human creative piece of this, right? Where you have the judgment and saying, nah, this one's not quite right, but here, change this one. Or like, I can choose from this list. Awesome. The Claude model or whatever you're using doesn't have enough information or intuition or something that seems a little bit fuzzier in there to choose, okay, yeah, this is the best one, just roll with it. I think that's going to continue to be the case. And then the other piece in there, though, is this knowledge sharing, right? So in a sense, when Claude or whatever model you're using outputs these tweets for you, you get a little bit of a peek into how it's like, quote unquote, thinking, right? Like it generated these things. You can see these it got kind of right, these it got kind of wrong. You could give it feedback, but you're getting insight into that. And when you give it data, it's not learning in real time with the few shot pieces, right? But maybe at some point it could. And I think the more that you get a system that it knows a little more about what you know and how you like, I don't even want to call it preferences because it's so squishy. You can't like learn these preferences easily. But the more that you and the model can get to a shared understanding of what the other thing knows and can fill in the blanks, right? You can say like, oh, yeah, you wrote that one, but you forgot or you didn't know, or by the way, actually add this piece because this is critical in there. So I think this way of interacting, and not even to me, I think the original like chat interface of ChatGPT where people are like, yeah, I can talk to the thing, and everyone like chatbots. This is already beyond that when it creates artifacts, right? It's not a conversation. It's not like, hey, I think you should generally do. It's like, no, here's your thing. Here is your output. And that's gotten really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, we definitely like, I was arguing against chat interfaces, and then the product that I built was like a chatless interface. And we're just, like, I think, yeah, to your point, like, that, like, reducing that down is actually like, it can be helpful. And then, we need to bring it back in some form, but it's, there, I don't know, there's interesting trade-offs to that. And the form that we're bringing it back is definitely not a totally general interface. And that's the only way that it can compete with Claude, because you can do the same thing in Claude. It just has to be very specific to your purposes. I've been thinking about doing a thing, and something about the shape of it makes me feel like you would be into it, or like have interesting thoughts on it, and whether it would work and what I should think about. So I'd love to talk about it. You said something earlier that reminded me of it, but I forgot what it was. So let me just lay it out for you. I'm pretty curious. So, okay. I don't know whether we've talked about this before, but I have OCD. One of the things I've been thinking about or lightly trying is I wanted to see if it was possible I wear a Whoop. So to take my Whoop data and be able to label from the graphs whether or not I'm experiencing OCD on a particular day. And so far, my answer to that is like kind of maybe, but like it actually probably needs more context to know. Because like what a spike means on a stress graph and a Whoop like can mean a lot of different things depending on what's going on in the background. And what's really cool about these models is now they know enough to like be able to take the context and use that. And so I'm not far enough along yet. Like another thing I'm going to try is I'm starting to do daily like 2-minute video journals, and there's this like emotion labeling AI called Hume, and I'm going to see that can label it. So I don't know. There's some interesting things there where I think it actually I feel pretty confident there's some combination of data where I can get from data to label to be like, yes, like he's having OCD symptoms today, or no, he's not. And once I'm there, the big question to me is, will it be possible to predict, let's say a day in advance, whether or not I will start to experience OCD, or whether or not I'm in a sort of OCD phase, like whether it'll go away? Because I think once you can predict it, opens up lots of interesting things. And so my thought for how to do this is to basically do a bounty and do like a 10 grand. If you can predict my OCD, here's a data set. And let anybody, because everyone, you can use O1 Pro for $200. Anyone can like do this basically now in a way that they couldn't before. And like A, see if that works, and then B, maybe build that into like a sort of Kaggle like but we're now everyone's a data scientist, right? And there's probably a lot of things that you would be into about this, but like or have thoughts on. But the thing that I'm kind of interested in is like, I think making predictions about, and maybe we talked about this a bit, but I think making predictions about whether or not I'll have OCD is a form of science, but it's a form of science that like a scientist would never do, because it's like an N of 1 experiment and you're not actually looking for a causal explanation, you're just predicting. So it's like completely taboo to like the establishment of like research, but it's completely incredibly useful, and I think now doable, where I think we should be doing a lot more of these kind of N of 1 things, and pursuing more predictions over like underlying scientific causal explanations. And I just thought that would get your brain going and you'd have interesting things to say.
Totally. Yeah. And I appreciate you reining it in too, because I'm like, oh, I have all of these pieces I can talk through. Yeah. I think the N of 1 thing is interesting because, like, if you came to me and you're like, I am in great pain from this, right? Like, you were like, I am suffering. And as my friend, I would be like, gosh, how do I help you? And if I thought I could slap together a model, you got your WHOOP data, great. Like, it'll take me whatever amount of time, but like, I could just do this. What I wouldn't actually go to one of the large language models straight away. Like that, like my brain would say, we need a predictive model. We need to understand the data sources. So I think it would be an interesting combination of looking at the actual like research, right? So like there is research out there on OCD. I'm not an OCD researcher.
No physiological, as far as I can tell, there's no physiological marker research.
Fascinating. That is actually the most interesting.
And I did buy an at-home EEG to see if I could do stuff. That it's all like MRI stuff, so it's not usable by me.
That's so interesting. That's like a whole other podcast in and of itself. Like, why do we not have biological correlates for a thing that is fairly common in the population and probably has like at least a heart rate difference? Like something has to change.
That's true for pretty much all mental illness. Is there are no biomedical markers, biophysical markers. If it is, it goes from like being psychiatry to being neurology. So like certain things used to be like mental illnesses that are now just neurological issues. So yeah, it's very like all of psychology is basically built on self-report, as far as I can tell.
I know. It's true. Yes, I believe that also. So, okay, I could make some like easy predictions off the bat and go, okay, heart rate data, probably important as a predictive measure of this. If you can give me labels, right? It's a question of how many labels do you need to make this work? Is it 700 and then you're suffering for a really extended period of time if we think about like, I don't, how long these episodes might last. And so I think if I were going to start from this, I might actually, the way I would use these models though, is to like help come through literature and say, okay, I'm looking for this like pretty specific information. How do you help me jump into a field that like it's not mine, but it's adjacent to one I know enough. But then also help me build the model, right? Like, help me think about how to build this predictive model. Here's the data that I've got, or the type of data. Help me not build an LLM, but build a model that has predictive power that is well beyond what the LLM would be able to do. Right? Because the LLM isn't really trained to be a predictive model. It's trained to predict language, and it has reasoning capabilities from that. But there's lots of other models out there that would take all this data, normalize it, put it together, and say, okay, now we can build a basic predictive model, which would be a great Kaggle exercise in and of itself, right? If I don't think it exists, but so I think the piece that's interesting is translating your like, if you have a video sort of like daily, I don't know, check-in or something, like translating that into something that is useful for this kind of model. Fei Li did some really interesting work a really long time ago. She's sort of like the mother of AI, I guess we can call her. I don't know if she would care for that label, but she had a fascinating paper, and it's a really long time ago now. But it was taking different data inputs. So it was video data, like people talking, and they could predict depression or the onset of a depressive episode. And it was the facial expression, it was the cadence of their voice, the tone, like all of this data lives in this. And I don't know that there's anything correlated for OCD. But I think you could use these models to sort of transduce that information into some meaningful signal for a different model.
Yeah, I think you're right. So basically with Hume, the cool thing about Hume is it turns your video into the equivalent of like emotion embeddings, which is pretty cool. And so each frame, it like for your voice and your facial movements and whatever, it like outputs an embedding that represents what it thinks where you are in the emotional embedding space. And so my guess is that can be used and it fed into some sort of predictive model, but I don't know.
Yeah. And if you had it over time, right? So if this model ran frequently enough that you get like time series data that's meaningful, even if it was once every 10 minutes or something, and you could aggregate over your WHOOP data, you could bring it. I could totally see how you could put these pieces together and then say, okay, I can label for you when I'm having these episodes. I can label for you when I feel like if you have a sense when they're starting to come on versus fully in the middle of this versus it's at the tail end. I think it's totally possible.
What I'm doing so far is more of a, like I built this little app for myself where I do retrospective assessments. So the in the morning, I'm like retrospective, like how was I yesterday? Like what were my symptoms if I had any? And then I upload a screenshot of my loop graph, and then I do a 2-minute like check-in of, I don't say how I'm feeling, but I just talk into the camera about like what I'm gonna do that day or something like that. Because I don't want to like give away the label. So you're saying maybe I should be doing more like momentary type data gathering too, like if I'm in the middle of something, like try to catch it if I can, you know?
Yeah. Without aggravating the symptoms, obviously, right? Because I can see how that could spiral. No pun intended, but like people really want to get into a weird thing. You're like, what if I can like keep doing this thing?
Well, one of the funny things is like the treatment for OCD, one of the big treatments is exposure. So like I can just it's for science. It's exposure for science.
Chalk it up to exposure therapy. Oh gosh. Yeah. So like I think if I was gonna model any kind of like, I don't know, psychological thing that was happening periodically, I would want the data from like right before, in the middle, so you've confirmed it's true, right? And then at the end and see, okay, like what are the shifts and changes that happen? And then I think what's interesting with the models also is like you could get other contextual data that you don't have, right? Like location is an obvious one. Like where are you generally in the world?
My calendar.
Your calendar. Yep. Who are you talking to? What are you doing? What is your workload? We've got all these sleep predictors, right? We like the WHOOP is good for saying like, did you sleep well the night before? It does all these other analyses.
How would I get that into a non-LLM though? Like let's say I have a calendar, like let me tell you what I've been doing, because you're probably gonna laugh because it's so dumb. But like what I've been doing so far is like just taking the images and the labels and just like throwing them into Claude and O1 and being like, based on these, here are labeled images. I want you to like come up with a set of rules to like classify whether or not I'm having OCD or not. And it's currently not very good.
I wouldn't expect it to be. I would be pretty shocked if it was. Like, you might open up like a portal into some other like whole other research field. Yeah, it would actually be fascinating if it worked. So what I would say is what you need for a predictive model, right, is you need to get all of these signals as features. And then for like something that has temporal dynamics to it, right? Like I think you can get it off the Whoop. I think I tried at some point, but if you can get
the daily summary, but not the momentary statistics, you have to like, I think I can create a data pipeline because I could just take a screenshot and then feed it into Claude, and Claude will be like, here's what like make an SVG that like matches the line of the Whoop graph and then turn that into time series or something. I think it's awesome.
time series. Yeah, that's actually really cool. I didn't think of that. So that's very clever as a way to get this data. So what I would say is like you need temporal data that's fairly time locked, and then you need to convert all of these pieces into features, right? So you have your video that you're taking at a certain time. And so like you would need to do some processing on the video to pull out, and you can use Hume, it sounds like, to do that. But pull that out, have the timestamp associated with it, have the actual time series of the Whoop data, have like as much of that sort of queued up to these time pieces. And then those are features that go into a basic classifier. And it depends on the task. Like there's lots of different ways to classify data, but all you're doing then is like providing information to the model, a non-LLM model, to say like this or this, right? And you kind of have a binary classification unless you do predict like, oh, it's oncoming, it's happened, it's fading, right? Like if you and that's also not a terribly difficult classification task, right? My bet is that if you asked Claude, if you said like, hey, I've got this data, turn it into a time series for me. Here's my video data with timestamps. Like, translate that into features. And then write, probably in Python, like a model for me, like a predictive model, basic one, and help me plug these features in. Like, I think you might be able to get somewhere with that. I think the problem is asking an LLM to do the predictive work because it's not really set up to do that. It doesn't execute other models.
That's interesting. What about because I mean, you can use an LLM as like a basic classifier model. So you're just saying that it's like classifying a different kind of sequence, and so the features that it's going to pay attention to in a text sequence are just going to be different from the features it pays attention to in like a OCD kind of more sequence.
Yeah. And depending on the model, like I know there's multimodal aspects to the models now. I actually don't know that LLMs are the best for like classifying certain things. And so like even now I'm still saying, okay, Bird Topic is a different kind of model. It's a large model, but it's not OpenAI or Anthropic's models, right? Like models that are specific to pulling out tags or categories or things like that from text data are actually still a little better than just throwing it into the big model. They're more specialized. So that might change as these models get better, but I don't think that these are in and of themselves better than like other machine learning models that are really meant to classify, especially time series data.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm like basically feel like what I feel like I'm doing right now, which I didn't even realize I'm doing, is I'm like trying to kill a mosquito with a rocket launcher or something like that. It's like
it's a pretty tool. Yeah, totally. But it can help you build the right ones, which is cool.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, I guess I want to maybe pull us out of the like specific details of this particular engineering problem and more to the like higher level of like, I'm thinking about how this might change science and how this might change how we do science. And I'm curious for your thoughts there.
Yeah. I think it's already probably changed fundamentally how we do science from the knowledge standpoint, right? Being able to comb through all of that information and pull things out, like, has saved graduate students and postdocs and these people like countless years of their, I don't know, it must like that part feels incredible to me. So that in one way is how we change science. The second way will be simulating. So the data is huge to train these models. We have all the hardware for these things, and they're getting good at simulating data good enough. Like if you have a solid existing data set, you can say, simulate lots more data like this. And that is incredible if you're trying to like understand the possibility space as a scientist. And kind of winnow that down to, okay, And it's hard for humans to do, right? We can make predictions, we can synthesize data, but keeping in mind all of these different kinds of possible future states is really, really, really hard. So I think it'll change science in that way. I don't think we're going to lose scientists. I don't think we'll have AI scientists, really. I think there is a problem around, like, I think humans still do a lot of the hypothesis generation, which is a lot of the science, and still thinking critically about, okay, what kind of data are we even trying to get to, like, understand this, like, to even get started on this space or this hypothesis.
That's interesting. I mean, that's sort of like where what I've been thinking about is like, okay, in a world where the data is actually like the really important and like rare thing, and you want to get really good data, is the substrate of a scientific paper actually the right format to release science in? Like, for example, there's a lot of like open data type pushes right now. And is the idea of doing like a 16-person study actually at all interesting, or should the project of science be to gather as much good data sets about problems that we care about as we can, and to aggregate them and then allow any scientist to build models on them rather than writing papers about them? I mean, papers are fine, but like in general, like, there's a huge overproduction of papers and huge underproduction of like usable good data. And then if it moves to production of good data and basically building good predictive models, then like, for me, it feels like, and I've been on this soapbox for a little while, like, for me, like, I feel like we should be actually going for predictions first before we do the causal explanation stuff, especially for things like psychology or psychiatry or whatever, where the causal explanations are really, 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 really complicated. Because if you can predict my depression or predict my OCD or predict what intervention is going to work, it's like life changing. And if you have a good enough predictor, like maybe the explanations are in there somewhere. So that's kind of where I've been thinking about, like, okay, science may change and it may have to change in this particular way where it looks a lot more like engineering. It looks a lot more like data gathering and model building. And maybe a lot more like, and this, I think you'll have opinions on, which I would really like, maybe a lot more like the shift that we went through from symbolic AI to sub-symbolic AI. Maybe that shift where, we were trying to find rules and logical, this is not for you, it's for people listening, rules and like logical formulas to like define what intelligence or intelligent decisions was. And then we were like, actually, why don't we just throw a bunch of data at a model and like it'll just figure it out? That shift, maybe we need to apply that to the rest of science and a lot of other areas of the world. And that would actually be really, really helpful.
I like the analogy they were drawing between sort of like the production of papers right now as being the more symbolic approach, where we've got this really specific thing that somebody's asking a question about. They gather small data usually. And it really depends. Like, science is such a broad field. So I also don't want to like shoot myself in the foot with like, well, there's so many kinds of science. My space that I used to work in is like small N studies, right? Like, maybe 10, 20 people. It's not huge. Drawing conclusions from that is hard, and it's hard to replicate. But if we say, okay, the like more symbolic pieces of this are like rules based, and we're saying we've learned something really, really specific about this very narrow thing, and now we can create a rule around that. And then the next person comes along and says, like, I follow this rule because you published a paper. I'm moving on. So I think a couple of things in there. I do think we should be publishing a lot more data. I think that the data asymmetry between what people can use to train models, let's say like the large language models, right? Like all of this text on the internet, that was a huge unlock now that we have the compute power to deal with that amount of data. We have the compute power though. So if people release data sets in other domains, it would be potentially like this very like synergistic and like maybe sort of like almost not a linear, but maybe like a log scale improvement in things, right? Like the more we get this combinatorial power of lots of different pieces of this broader data set that everybody gets a chance to see, right? And And so I do think like as time goes on, as we get more access to data and compute, scientists do become more computational by nature, even if they never were before, right? They have access to the combinatorial like tools in their toolbox to answer questions. And then I still think it's useful to publish papers. Like it's useful to get this information out there. The problem has always been we only publish certain things. And so we're not getting any information around what's failed or what's been tried. And so we really are only getting a very weird and skewed slice of science, as it were. So I don't think we need fewer papers. We might need more papers. And if we have a tool to help us sift through those, maybe it doesn't matter. But also, if you do make data available, there are people that are able to use it for lots of different things that you may never have thought of. The hard part, speaking as a former scientist, comes in that the way that you chose to collect that data is incredibly important, right? What was the setting you were in? What were like all the way down to like the refresh rate of the monitor often. And so making this transferable is hard.
That's the thing is like, I feel like there's this big push, like basically there's a big push to generalization. That's the whole object of science as we've construed it because of Newton and like the Enlightenment in general. And I think what we find in like cognitive science or psychology or whatever, like it's so contextual that every time people have claimed to like have something really, really generalized, not every time, but like a lot of the time, it's like much weaker than we thought, and like it's not as reliable as we thought, and then people get angry at scientists, and it's like, well, maybe we're setting like a super like an almost impossible task, and we're like asking the wrong question. And that's why I think the kind of N of one thing is more interesting, because it's like, yeah, sure, like the context really matters, great, because I'm one person, like please, like I'm in my context, like solve for my context and worry about the generalization later. And the other thing that this made me think of, I was talking about like papers and data sets, is one of the nice things about shifting away from paper as the thing that you publish is that a paper, you don't publish papers that don't, the hypothesis doesn't bear out. But if you're just publishing the data set, as long as the data is quality, you'll publish it. And then the model is like, you unbundle the model, which is like the kind of conclusion part from the data, which I think is kind of interesting. And then it also, if the thing that's really important is the data, like it's really stupid that researchers have to get grants to study like 5 undergrads when like Facebook has like all the data that you would ever need. And well, this is a family show, so we'll bleep that out. But what I think is big tech companies should establish data trusts where they will donate their data for qualified researchers to like ask questions and find out the answers. Like it's all sitting there. It's just, we just need to use it.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, there's some of this that does happen, right? Like, and this is the big argument around keeping open source models, right? Like academics can use these open source models and they can build on them and they can do awesome things with them. The more you close those down, the more we we mess with academics on this point. But I think, I think establishing a data trust makes a ton of sense. I think like scientists can ask the right questions. Pushing everything towards a general space doesn't really work. I don't think it works with AI either. Like to bring it back to this sort of modeling that we're talking about now. And I think the power is not choosing open data sets over papers, but the combination. So for me, something that like I am thinking about a lot right now is from news articles, how do we deeply understand that information? And then how do we build things on top of that? I think with academic papers, it's similar. How do I deeply understand, like not the conclusions, maybe not the methods are important, but if I were to take all of this information out of this paper, if I had access to the data in combination with that, that would be a really like another level of understanding. And even alternative hypothesis generation and testing I could do, possibly, depending on the data set.
Have I shown you extendable articles?
Oh, I think I saw it. It came out this week.
It came out last week.
Last week. Okay. Yeah. I started poking around with it. It looks super cool.
Is it cool?
It's super cool.
On your point, where for people who haven't seen it, like we built this little tool where when we publish an article on every that has a lot of original interviews and research, you can basically read the article, and then we also make all of the sources, all of the hours of interviews and articles and whatever that we conducted and found and read. We make that available as a little chatbot, so you can kind of like go through and form your own opinion. I guess is that sort of what you're talking about?
Kind of, yeah. So like if I could if every news article came with that, it would be incredible, right? And this is like, there is a thread through here, actually, the stuff we were building with Recollect, where we were taking all of these pieces of information, like articles you could read, whatever it was, connecting those, and then generating something on top of that. We had a line back to what were the pieces that went into this, right? And now on the other side of that, I'm trying to understand news articles that are coming through for the work I'm doing at SmartNews, but like the deeper understanding of that I get right now comes from how these articles are interconnected, and I'm creating that in the models then later. But with what you've made with this, like you're giving me, what is connected to this, or like how did you get to write this article, right? So I feel like it comes from a couple of different angles, but the more you get those pieces, the richer the understanding becomes, and I think the more interesting things we can do with that.
That is interesting. To generalize, I feel like one of the patterns that we're pulling out is like, and this is something that I've written about before, but like in only more specific context, but like there's all these places in machine learning, in science, in journalism, where for whatever reason, the story and the underlying data that were like used to create the story were always had to be bundled. And that created a lot of problems. And the solution is not to get rid of stories. The stories are like also very, very important, but it is to say like, we are now in a place where the underlying data is actually probably just as important as the story, because it's now way more discoverable and legible than it was before without the authorial perspective. And that perspective is still important, but like it's important to present it with this other thing, and we'll make way more progress as a society if we do that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yep. I think if we can, like from what you're saying, which I am on board with, you as the story creator, you as the writer, you as the narrator, you as the scientist, right, writing this paper, these are all ways of conveying information. It's a story in and of itself. You have an interpretation of a thing. And if you provide the interpretation and the pieces that you went through that got you there, whatever those are, they could be other articles, they could be thoughts you put together, they could be conversations you had with other people. That all that information, then somebody could then generate their own separate story from it in a much quicker way too. Than if they had, I got to read the entire reference section of this paper and I got to comb through all of your last paper and whatever.
It's no longer necessary. We don't need to do that. And that's so good, because like how much time have you wasted trying to like understand some like crazy paper that like is really important, but like you have to understand 5 background things in order to read it, and like that's not a thing anymore. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy and it's exciting. I'm thrilled.
All right, we're almost at time. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or anything else on your mind before we end?
Yeah, I feel like this last conversation is something that would be fun to do more on, but I feel like we won't get the time. Like this, like how does this intersect with the stuff you're doing with every, like now I'm thinking about this media news space. Like I think there's like there's not been much change in this space, which I thought would happen with AI, but I think it might be coming and I'm not sure.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So the question, just to make sure I understand, is like, how does this like kind of unbundling of story and data that we think is interesting in science and also in media, how does that affect media? How does it affect how I'm running every that's what you're asking about?
Yeah, and like I think maybe one level up from that broader question is we've got all the stuff that's happened in the last couple of years with AI. A lot of it is text heavy, story heavy. We haven't seen a fundamental shift in like media. Well, we've seen like lots of generated articles and stuff, and people have mixed feelings on those, but like we haven't seen a huge shift, and it must be burgeoning.
Yeah, I think it's coming. And obviously like we're to some degree trying to invent it. So like I have some specific opinions, but like I don't know if I'm right. I think I in general have an opinion on like where it will go, and like a general opinion, and then like some specific bets that we're making. So like one of those bets is this sort of extendable article thing, which I think in its current form is like not good enough. And it's like, it's really interesting conceptually, but it's not something that like a lot of readers are going to use all the time. And I want to get there and sort of try to make it standard. Another thing, we've created a new synthetic show from Every called TLDR. And TLDR is a 3 to 5 minute AI generated podcast about your company. So about meetings that you missed. And so, and it's done with all of the like writing and taste and like storytelling ability of the writers and producers at Every, but it's about your company. And we take meeting recordings and turn that into podcasts so that if you miss a meeting, you know what's going on. And it's like the first of hopefully many shows that we'll end up doing. So TLDR is about meetings you missed. There might be like a how it's made type show that like talks about like a big product launch that you did, or like, you know, a Sunday strategy catch up where it's like, here's all the stuff that happened this week as you're like, you know, reading your morning, not reading your morning coffee, drinking your morning coffee, stuff like that. So that's another thing, which is like, as storytelling gets cheaper, I actually don't think it replaces other kinds of storytelling. Like we're still going to watch movies, but it means that we can tell stories in places where it would be too expensive to tell them otherwise before. So like no NPR producer is going to want to make a show about like most internal meetings, but now that doesn't matter. Like every company has a story and you can have AI tell that story. And that's, I think, really cool. So that's another, you know, place that we're kind of excited about.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. And I've been following the Notebook LLM stuff too, in terms of the podcast they're creating. I love the idea of saying, no one would bother to create this. Now we can, right? Like no one's going to sit in your meetings or whatever and be like, you know, now you're up first. That is really, really a neat application of that. I've been thinking a lot about accessibility of stories and how do you craft a story that is maybe distilled or shorter, but doesn't lose some of the characteristics of, you know, what you're trying to actually say. But, you know, either translate that to another language or make it audio, make it video, make it something that somebody that wouldn't actually, like, maybe they have morning coffee, maybe they don't, but like, maybe they don't read, right? Like they don't want to sit and read something. So I'm pretty excited about, like, I think that'll be a fundamental shift in terms of the cheapness of producing that piece.
I agree. I mean, the thing, like, there are all these classic books that like can become more readable, more interesting, more visual, more audio. I've been rewriting this Platonic dialogue as a narrative nonfiction, and I threw it into Sora, and like it made a movie out of it, and I was like, this is amazing.
Oh my God. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's so much culture that like is inaccessible because it's like the only person that gets to translate it is someone who like studied that for like 50 years. Like that's important, but it'd be nice if there was like 50 other translations that are more accessible for a particular kind of person.
Yep. Yeah. And then like doing the work of creating a story, like something we've been thinking about a lot recently is like local news, like very local things that happen. Nobody does the work. Like you don't have a ton of journalists out there, right, that are doing this. It's kind of suffering, but you still need this information. You need it in a way that is a story. And so like, I think this piece, it's like, it's on the meeting piece, but kind of, right? Like if it's the stuff that's happening to you in your little, like whatever sphere you're encompassing here. And then like, yeah, I am very excited about like underserved spaces, I guess. Like this is the thing where I feel like we can make an actual impact. Like this is the thing where we get people access to information that didn't have it before. And that's huge.
It goes back to what you said earlier about raising the bar and raising the ceiling and lowering the bar. And like lowering the bar for storytelling, I think is really important.
Yeah, and story consumption, right? Yeah. So I am excited. I think 2025 for me is hopefully gonna be this year where we see the application of these things and like your products coming out, right? I'm excited you're incubating these things now. That's super exciting.
I love that. I hope that's true. I'm excited for this year too. And I'm really glad that we got to chat. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was good to see you.
Oh my gosh, folks, you absolutely positively have to smell smash that like button and subscribe to AI and I. Why? Because this show is the epitome of awesomeness. It's like finding a treasure chest in your backyard, but instead of gold, it's filled with pure, unadulterated knowledge bombs about ChatGPT. Every episode is a roller coaster of emotions, insights, and laughter that will leave you on the edge of your seat, craving for more. It's not just a show. It's a journey into the future with Dan Shipper as the captain of the spaceship. So do yourself a favor, hit like, smash subscribe, and strap in for the ride of your life. And now, without any further ado, let me just say, Dan, I'm absolutely, hopelessly in love with you.